Oh, thank you so much, Marie. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. I just really want to thank Catherine, Kelly, Alberta Enterprise Group, and all of the sponsors for bringing us together today. I am so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this for the last couple of weeks so that we could talk a little bit about the road ahead. Yes, of course, for emissions reduction and all of the important work that's happening in environment. And part of that is making sure that we have a strong, growing, diverse economy for Alberta. I'm going to try to keep my comments brief so that we have lots of time to get to the questions and discussion. I know your members come from a wide range of sectors and backgrounds, but every single person in this room shares a common goal of making sure that Alberta continues to be the best place in the world to live and to do business. Alberta has a proud history of being pro-business, pro-innovation, and pro-growth. That legacy and history is in no small part due to business leaders like you. You've helped shape Alberta's reputation as the best place to do business and the best people to do business with. It is no secret that our province's abundant natural resources, appealing tax rates, and of course, highly skilled workforce have made us a key investment destination and have helped us once again lead the country in economic growth. I am optimistic that our best days are yet to come, but our success here in Alberta, it's not a given. And that's why I would say just a couple months ago, my predecessor, Minister Sonia Savage and Premier Danielle Smith, rolled out our emissions reduction and energy development plan. This matters. It matters for investment, it matters to industry, and it mattered that we showed up at the table with a plan and really some goals and specific outcomes for how we're going to get there. We need to reduce emissions and still expand our major industries. We need to be talking about growth, not just survival, specifically under this federal government, but also growth and expansion. We are world leaders in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We have led the country in renewable energy growth, and we have surpassed our methane reduction targets. And we can continue down that path while still growing and expanding. In agriculture, we have so many exciting things happening. It was great to hear you talk about the need to access affordable, reliable energy, because that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today. So thank you for foreshadowing where I was headed. We talk a lot about hydrogen, emissions reduction in cement, petrochemicals, and yes, of course, we need to talk about LNG and our energy industry because we need to reduce emissions, and we can do that worldwide by supplying the energy that the world needs right now. Global energy demands are growing every single day. Fossil fuels will remain essential for decades to come, and in fact, the demand for reliable and affordable energy is so great that this year the world will use more oil and more coal than at any time in human history. If we can't get our natural gas to market, countries around the world will continue to increase coal development, driving up global emissions, which is the exact opposite of what we're all trying to do. Our biggest barrier, I'm sure you can guess, a federal government who is completely out of touch with everyday Canadians and is often working against us and not with us. So when I was thinking about this lunch and what can I tell this group of business leaders that they don't already know, I thought a great place to start was my first meeting with my federal counterpart nearly 2 weeks ago. It was pleasant, of course. I'm fairly pleasant on most days, but it was also very concerning. I don't believe that the federal government truly cares about the affordability concerns of everyday Canadians. I also don't believe they have done any work to understand or gather data or even seriously considered the impacts to people, to families, to GDP, to jobs, to Indigenous communities, to entire municipalities, to the province's books, or to Canada's. So that was my top ask. I cited numbers from S&P Global saying, look, this isn't us. This is independent data and analysis that says that the emissions cap would mean a reduction of over 1 million barrels a day of production, the loss of at least 10,000 direct jobs, not even indirect jobs, and thousands of indirect jobs. That would devastate entire towns. I cited Fort McMurray, Bonnyville, Cold Lake, Indigenous communities, many of which in Northern Alberta, but not just limited to Northern Alberta. I raised the Public Policy Forum estimate that had come out just that morning, saying it would cost trillions to move to a net zero electricity grid by 2035, and other data that suggested this would cause an increase in people's electricity bills by 40%, and I believe that that's a minimum. the response, I was told, was, well, these people don't know what they're talking about. We haven't released our electricity regulations. We haven't set an emissions cap. So these numbers are, quote, coming out of thin air. So again, I asked for data. I asked for socioeconomic impacts, the impacts to the real humans that we, likewise, both us, the federal government, we are elected to serve. I'm hopeful that we get that data in our bilateral tables. Those negotiations will hinge on us having that data so that we can have real discussions about where we're headed, and because I also believe that Albertans and Canadians alike deserve to see the impacts of disastrous federal legislation. So hopefully we don't get there. That's why we've set up these tables. But I'll give you 3 examples of very, very problematic legislation that we're seeing brought forward by the federal government. The first, of course, the net zero electricity grid by 2035. This is imminent. Just a draft is coming. It's imminent, it's just a draft. We will be providing feedback once we see that. We haven't seen it yet, but that very day, like I said, there was a report done by the Public Policy Forum suggesting this would cost us trillions of dollars. Who's going to pay for that? I mean, it's either Albertans with a minimum of 40% increase on their bills, their electricity bills, at a time when affordability is a top of mind issue, not just for Albertans, but for all Canadians, or we pay through it through our taxes, right? Another major concern is reliability. And I suggested to Minister Guilbeault, look, I don't think Canadians want to see rolling blackouts. You're a politician, I'm a politician. I don't think either of us want to be in that situation. And I mean, winters without power or heat, yes, I'm proud. 75% of renewable investment in Canada last year was in Alberta. We're a great place to do business, and that includes for renewable sectors. That is a good story to tell. But we also have to make sure we're doing it in a way that doesn't jeopardize reliability in our system, especially in a province like ours. Plastics. Second piece of legislation I'll talk about today is the plastics ban and the labeling legislation. This is honestly just insane. I spent last week in Ontario with federal environment ministers from across the country, and this is the number one area that was raised as an area where federal legislation is actually getting in the way of us doing the right thing when it comes to recycling and plastics, when sometimes legislation has inadvertent impacts on what's actually happening out there in communities. And I use the example of Calgary Co-op and Leaf Environmental Products. Jerry is an exceptional entrepreneur, like many of you in this room. He saw a problem and asked how he could solve it. How can he make this a better place? He was very passionate. He was working as an auditor. I'll start by saying that. But he was really passionate about the environment, and he wanted to take a chance. So the timing was interesting. He and his wife were looking at having a baby, and obviously being an entrepreneur takes a great amount of risk. And so he said, look, Rebecca, I asked for a sign, and the next day I got a call from Calgary Co-op, and the rest is history. So he found a replacement for plastic shopping bags. He developed a bag that is, first of all, not plastic. Second of all, it's fully compostable. Thirdly, that bag is now banned by ECCC. So I took a bag for every single minister and bureaucrat in every province, and of course from the federal government who were in those meetings last week, handed them out with a business card, a link to a National Post article that outlined how ridiculous this is, that legislation is getting in the way of entrepreneurs stepping up and trying to do the right things for our province, for our country, and quite frankly, for our environment. That was fun. It was a great prop. But you know what, it's an important, I think it's one of the things that we have to do a better job of is making this real for everyday people, and that's with the example of the bags. It wasn't just for a photo op, it was a very real example of the entrepreneur and the innovation that went behind this very tangible product and why legislation is getting in the way of good work being done. Lastly, we have the oil and gas cap. An emissions cap that puts us at a 42% reduction by 2030 is just not possible. And that's not just me saying that. It's not Alberta being opposed to federal government targets. It's not that at all. We also have an aspiration to carbon neutrality by 2050. I did also suggest to Minister Guilbeault, I said, look, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, would you ever have guessed that we would have a Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and a Premier Danielle Smith aligned on goals around where we're going to be by 2050. They laughed. It was a good way to break the ice, but it's true. My plea was, let's not let how we get there get in the way of the good work that's being done by industry and by provinces working together. So to start, we can't have an oil and gas cap at a time when Canada and the rest of the world needs reliable, secure, and affordable energy. We will continue to need reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy both now, before, and after that arbitrary date that they've chosen of 2030. Shutting in responsibly produced energy from Alberta decreases reliability and increases costs for Canadians. And of course, then the world produces oil and gas from elsewhere. So that, again, has the opposite impact on global greenhouse gas emissions. The technology that we need to make this happen also doesn't yet exist. Part of the holdup, Bill C-69, right? It essentially throws all of these projects into regulatory purgatory, and we can't move those projects ahead without clarity. There's little hope of those projects being approved the way that that act is right now. Secondly, the federal government has not delivered on their commitments to support clean technology. These promises were made back in 2021. They announced that investment tax credit for capital invested in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. The website still says it's coming. Available starting in 2022 is, I think, the wording on the website. It is now 2023, and it still isn't in place. So without commercially available technology, these targets mean shutting in production, and Alberta just will not accept that. To start, that would be madness for Alberta and Canada to not provide what the world demonstrably needs right now. But we also have to look at the everyday realities. This industry is an economic powerhouse, generating $168 billion in GDP in 2021. That's more than 7% of Canada's economic activity at risk, and billions in lost tax revenue that governments rely on to fund everything from healthcare to education to infrastructure. An emissions cap at that level that technology can't get us to, while killing off the technology investment needed to actually reduce emissions, is terrible policy. And I would say it's regressive policy. It's not just that Alberta won't accept a cap on our main industry, it's also that we can't. That level of economic destruction is something that absolutely no province in our country would accept, nor would they consider. And Alberta is no different. However, Canada does not have to choose between cutting production and cutting emissions. We can aspire to carbon neutrality, we can innovate, we can keep our energy sector working, we can ensure that we have affordable and reliable energy, and that's what Alberta's emissions reduction and energy development plan is all about. These technologies aren't just for oil and gas either. They can enable low carbon electricity, clean hydrogen, petrochemicals, upgrading and refining, cement. I know Heidelberg is a member. We're going to tour their facilities very soon. Steel, fertilizer, biodiesel production, and gas processing. But we have my federal counterpart out there in the media. He wasn't at the meeting last week with the federal environment ministers. He was overseas. He was in India. You know, we have him talking about cutting federal supports and talking about emissions caps still, while we're in good faith getting to the table with the federal government at these bilateral tables. We also have Ministers LeBlanc, Wilkinson, O'Regan, Freeland, talking about emissions reduction technology and how they want to see those investments in clean tech. We want to see those too. So I reminded my counterpart that those investments don't happen if we cut off natural gas feedstock or if we drive investor uncertainty, which an oil and gas cap most certainly does. Those investments then, they'll go elsewhere. I don't want to see that. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Alberta and Canada to lead the world in emissions reduction and sustainable energy development. We can reduce emissions here. We can do it worldwide. We can protect our environment. We can be innovators in technology. We can step up to solve the world's energy needs. Unfortunately, I do believe that the mixed messages from the federal government suggest that they could again choose ideology and politics instead of common sense and working together in, I think, the best interests of the people that we are here to serve. That would risk jobs. It would risk the Alberta and Canadian economies, energy affordability, reliability, like I said, municipalities, Indigenous communities, and quite frankly, Confederation. There is a very real risk. Now, that choice would confirm what we've already seen, which is the federal government's track record of that disregard for affordability concerns of everyday people across our country. And it would be a pointed choice to choose to get our energy from other countries like Saudi Arabia, like Venezuela, instead of Western Canada or Newfoundland and Labrador. And we're seeing countries like Norway, in fact, step up, increase production and capacity to address those very concerns. We can do that too. So my simple ask to my federal counterpart was this: we have this amazing opportunity. Let's have history show the world that we worked together in the best interests of an entire nation, not just one province or another, not one political stripe or another. Let's have history show that we work together in the best interests of an entire nation, BC to Alberta to Newfoundland and Labrador. That starts with showing up at the table in good faith. I will. Our premier is. That's why she pushed the prime minister to set up those tables for negotiations. That work is getting underway. It's not going to take months. It's happening right now. I will strongly represent Albertans' interests at that table. I will work with other provinces where we're aligned. And while we're starting with showing up in good faith, we will use every means we have to fight back against any and all federal policies that would harm the Albertans that we serve. So my ask for you, all of you in this room, we need your ideas. We need your feedback. We are here representing the best interests of Albertans, but we all are in this together. We need to protect our industries from federal policies that would harm them, both our industries, our economy, our people, and our way of life. So thank you very much for having me today. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion.